Law on Obligations and Contracts, Voidable Contracts, Civil Code Article 1390 to 1402. Definition. Meaning of voidable contracts. Voidable or annullable contracts are those which possess all the essential requisites of a valid contract, but one of the parties is incapable of giving consent, or consent is vitiated by mistake, violence, intimidation, undue influence, or fraud. With this, we will discuss about voidable contract, and we will discuss how this contract became voidable. With these two, the incapacity and these vices of consent. Nature and effects. What contracts are voidable? First, let's discuss what contract is voidable or what is voidable contract. Based on Article 1390, ito daw yung reason bakit nagiging voidable ng isang contract. First, kapag ang isa sa mga parties ay incapable of giving consent. But to make it clear, ang incapable or incapacity na tinutukoy dito is the absolute incapacity. Since may dalawa tayong incapacity na tinatawag, which is the absolute and the relative incapacity, ang difference itong dalawa is kapag absolute incapacitated, means sa lahat ng contract na papasukin niya ay magiging voidable. Ang status nito, however, kapag relative incapacitated, it means may mga certain contracts na hindi niya pwedeng pasukan. And if ever or usually pinasok niya ang kontrata na yun, it is usually called a void contract. But because absolute incapacity is a part of the general rule, it means there's an exemption and what it is. And this is when the contracts involves necessaries. Here's an example, but take note, only one party here is incapacitated and the other one is capacitated. Dahil kapag parehong incapacitated, it will fall on enforceable contract. Example, June is minor. He bought food from Jen, 27 years old. This contract may have voidable, but involves necessaries. Ano nga ba itong mga necessaries na ito? Ito yung mga food, water, shelter, clothes, and others. Therefore, this contract is what we call perfectly valid, and this is not voidable. Number 2, vices of consent. Number 1, mistakes. Refers to the substance of the object, identity, qualification of a person, conditions that have principally moved one or both parties to enter into the contract. Example, Joy and Jay entered into a contract of sale for a piece of land worth 1 million. The clerk who made the deed mistakenly typed 100,000. Actually, this mistake has no effect sa kontrata between Jay and Joy. Dahil alam naman nilang it's worth 1 million. And it's actually perfectly valid. But the problem is, mali yung nakalagay sa written price. Then what is the proper thing to do? Reformation of this contract or the instrument na tinatawag. Number 2 is the violence. When in order to wrest consent, serious or irresistible force is employed. Example, B asked C to buy his cell phone for 1,500. C refused. B then punches C in the face until he agreed to buy it. It means may physical force involved. Example, naging voidable dahil may pumuwersa na tinatawag. Number 3, intimidation. When one of the contracting parties is compelled by a reasonable, well-grounded fear of an imminent and grave evil upon this property or person, or upon the person or property of his spouse, descendants, or ascendants to give his consents. Ang pagkakaiba nito sa nauna, which is violence, doon may physical contact, but dito ay wala po. Pero dito yung may tinatawag na pagbabanta, and feeling mo seryoso yung pagbabanta, kaya napa-oo ka sa contract. Example, B asks C to leave his land or else he will set C's house in fire. Kung halimbawa, ikaw, alam mo namang ang nagbanta ay may evidence na kayang-kaya niyang gawin yung sinasabi niya, ikaw ba hindi ka matatakot? It means the contract between them is voidable. But there is also an exemption. And ano to? Exception. A threat to enforce one's claim through competent authority if the claim is just as legal does not vitiate consent. It means the threat is not just a threat, but it involves or in connection to what is in the contract or it is legal. And number 4 is the undue influence. When a person takes improper advantage of his power over the will of another, depriving the latter of a reasonable freedom of choice. Okay, para mas maintindihan natin ito or para mas klaro, let's take an example. Your professor asked to marry you. You are of legal age. But the biggest factor you saying yes is because he is your professor. And if you say no, you are afraid he might be disappointed and fail you in class. This means you just entered into a contract because of vitiated undue influence. And it clearly means this is voidable. There is a reason later on para mapaalala natin yung marriage. And number 5 is the fraud. Insidious words or machination of one of the contracting parties, the other is induced to enter into a contract which, without them, he could not have agreed to. And under this, meron tayong tinatawag na letter A is dolo incidente or the incidental fraud, and letter B is the dolo causante or the causal fraud. Dolo incidente means ito yung fraud na ine-employ mo usually kapag tapos na o nagawa na yung contract. At yung dolo causante naman, usually ine-employ naman ito before mabuo ang isang kontrata. But this is not the case dahil there is a time na magkakaroon pa din ng mga cases falling under dolo incidente. But dolo incidente is not a voidable contract or will not fall into voidable contract, but dolo causante, it will eventually make a contract voidable. For example, 2 applies for a job with requirements of 3 to 5 years experience in a specific job. Though having only 3 years of experience, Zane make it appears he has 5 years. This shows na bagamat pasok siya sa qualifications, he made himself nandaya pa din siya. It's because he already had a 3 years experience, which is pasok sa 3 to 5 experience, but he clearly put that he had 5 years experience. This is incidental fraud, but the timing is before mabuo ang kontrata. Kaya ang mga voidable contracts is legal in object and operation is voidable because of a defect caused by either, again, number 1, legal incapacity to give consent, and number 2, the presence of vices or vitiation done by these vices.